Hello, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, The PMI-PBA from What Is It to I Did It, presented by Rich Larson. President and founder of Watermark Learning, Richard Larson has over 30 years of experience in business analysis, project management, training, and consulting. He has presented workshops and seminars to over 10,000 participants on 5 different continents. Rich is a frequent speaker at business analysis and project management conferences and IIBA and PMI chapters around the world. He has contributed to the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge version 2 and 3, as well as the Project Management Body of Knowledge 4th edition. Rich is also a lead author of the forthcoming PMI-BA Practice Guide. He and his wife, Elizabeth Larson, have co-authored 3 books, The Influencing Formula, CBAP Certification Study Guide, and Practitioner's Guide to Requirements Management. So without any further delay, please help me welcome Rich.
Hey, thank you, Stephen, for that nice introduction. And I think a couple of corrections on that. The PEA Practice Guide is actually not forthcoming anymore. It's out there. It's out, and we've also published a PMI-PBA Certification Study Guide as well since we wrote that introduction. So welcome, everybody. It's great to see all this representation around the world, especially halfway around the world from the US, where it's probably late at night in India. So thank you for staying up late and tuning in for this. You know, when I first heard about this new certification for PMI a couple years ago, I was admittedly a little confused. And being a business analyst already certified by IIBA, the International Institute of Business Analysis, I wonder what PMI was actually doing. And I'll explain more about that in a moment, what their intent was. But the more I learned about this certification and this credential, the more that the PBA appealed to me, given what its emphasis is really about. Because I'm also a PMP, and most of my recent project work, I've been both a PM and a BA, it started to dawn on me that this more hybrid role is really what the PBA is best suited for. And we have a poll coming up shortly to find out what kind of roles you guys play on projects to help me frame the discussion a little bit, and it's good feedback for us all as well. So the slide deck that you'll receive has a little bit of information about Watermark Learning, in case you don't know about us, to set the stage for what kind of training and the other services and associations we have. So there you have that for reference. The session today is designed to address really a wide variety of interests in the PBA certification, which is why the name is what it is. So from What Is It, we'll talk about the newest certification from PMI and why they created it and what it does for organizations, for you as individuals, and the overall industry. Then for application topics, we'll go over the requirements for applying, especially the work that qualifies, an important ingredient and one that's been an impediment up till now for some people. And finally, to succeed on it, we'll cover what you need to do to prepare and pass for your exam. And we'll focus on things such as what's the exam like? What and how should I study? What are the important components of it? And where do I find some preparation resources as well? So, and as Stephen had mentioned, we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. But for right now, we're going to release a poll and ask you what your primary responsibility is on projects. If you answer other, please send in through the chat window what your responsibility is, because I'm curious. If it's not one of the prescribed roles in the poll, send in a chat, if you will. What kind of, like, are you an architect? I see one person doing that. Anybody in the PMO, program managers coming across, a manager over business analysts, media strategist, that's cool, project controls manager. The majority of people weighing in today are project managers, which is not a surprise the more we know. I think, oh, John Rush. Hey, you're welcome, John. Thanks for your input, by the way. John was one of the early PBA exam credential people, and he gave us some good feedback on our PBA book. Welcome, John. So thanks. I think we can close the poll now. And knowing that 52% of the audience are project managers is an interesting feature or facet of this. And I think PMI was initially thinking that this certification would allow them to capture more interest in business analysts, but I think the primary interest is coming from people who are project managers. I mean, anyone who is interested in this certification is interested in business analysis on projects and around projects. And PMs and BAs are two of the roles, but I think there's a variety of other interests. We're seeing an increasing interest in people who perform hybrid roles, as it were. Someone who's even a manager. I talked to my cousin who was an IT manager, and he said he spent probably half his time doing business analysis work, so that as a project professional, if you will, anyone who does a sizable amount of business analysis work is who this certification is aimed at. Not your job title per se, but one who is involved in that. It could even be our vice president of operations who does a lot of work on projects, and a lot of it's a business analysis. So in order to sit for the exam, even to apply for it, I think a clear understanding of what business analysis is will help, and we'll talk more about that as we go through the presentation today. Now, in answering the question, what is this certification? It's really a combination of two things: having experience in business analysis to even complete the application and be able to prove your number of hours in education and so forth. We'll go over that in just a little bit, but also then passing a rigorous 200-question exam. And this is not a screenshot from the exam, it's from our simulator, but those two components are the main two things that you need to pass through, pretty much like the PMP. I'm assuming many of you are interested in that. Now, just like I was curious, why would PMI ever offer this? You might be asking yourself the same thing. And we've gotten comments and questions galore about the relationship of PMI and IIBA, because we've been involved in the CBAP, Certified Business Analyst Professional, which I'm one of, and we train a lot of CBAPs. And what we know is this: several years ago, PMI did reach out to IIBA and made them an offer that they felt they couldn't refuse, but IIBA did refuse. And here's the wording we've gotten from PMI to discuss, and I'll quote: "Contrary to urban legend, PMI made a broad offer to collaborate with the IIBA on business analysis standards and certifications. Unfortunately, we understand IIBA declined the offer, and we'd be speculating about the reasons why the collaboration didn't come to fruition," unquote. Now, why would PMI even reach out to IIBA in the first place? Well, it's because they saw a need as it relates to project success. PMI did some research back, I think it was in 2012, and they questioned organizations about their requirements management processes and practices. And here's some startling facts about what they uncovered when they did their research. So the Pulse of the Profession is where they published this, and they discovered that a number of projects had poor requirements, and that led to project failure. That many requirements efforts were understaffed and under-resourced. That only 20% of the organizations they surveyed felt they had any kind of business analysis maturity, and just about half of the people surveyed said they had any kind of requirements management competence. So those are pretty eye-opening statistics that led PMI to want to do something about this. And the organizations that they surveyed really should care about the whole subject. Improving project success is really what's driving the PMI-PBA. And here's some other benefits that organizations can reap from pursuing this. First of all, it's a way to recognize employees in their career development. I think it helps increase professionalism, and people learn a lot by getting certified, so it advances the knowledge within your organization. If someone has a PMI-PBA behind their name, I think it reduces the hiring risk, both when you're hiring employees and contractors. And I'll circle back to the improved project outcomes, which is really what's driving this in the first place. I think there's no guarantee that if you have a PBA that you're a better practitioner, but it combined with the on-the-job ability really shows something. and organizations can benefit from that. Now, I know many organizations have struggled with what to do about their business analysis practices. It's somewhat like PMI was maybe 20 odd years ago. Do you remember that time before the PMP? There was little standardization in the industry. People argued over which was the best way of doing things. It was harder to train new people because you had to do it on your own proprietary techniques. And with business analysis today, it's still much the same thing. Maybe not exactly the same way, but there are still several frameworks out there. And that too, I think, can be a struggle. So what PMI can help do and is doing is, with their established global reputation and their focus on business analysis, it's going to help organizations establish more consistent approaches and more common languages like the PMBOK and the PMP have done for contributing to a more common language about project work and better standards, and adoption of things like BA Centers of Excellence to raise the stature of that so the organizations provide more resources for those types of things, to raise that maturity level from 20% to a much higher needed amount. Plus, increased awareness is going to increase support in general for business analysis in organizations. So not just for centers of excellence, but just for resourcing and staffing and training and tools and the like. Now, for individuals, it can also help in a number of different ways. I think one of the chief ways that I like to talk about, because I've heard this from multiple CIOs in organizations, is that getting a credential demonstrates dedication to being what I called earlier a project professional. And we use that term to talk about people involved in and around projects, whether it's primarily project managers, business analysts, could be anyone else, testers, developers, architects. And by demonstrating that dedication, the executives in your organization are going to see that as a major benefit to certification. And if you're trying to get funding, that might be what you want to lead off with. It also helps your professional advancement, I think, in part because it demonstrates knowledge that you have to perform effective business analysis on projects. And I think it demonstrates a level of competence that you have, because it's not just a paper certification. I think the experience component demonstrates more than that, and the rigorous exam is really also indicative of higher competence. And lastly, career potential and more income are also possible. PMI is doing salary surveys frequently, and there's just one coming out right now, and we've got that featured in an upcoming newsletter of ours that we refer to. Now, if you are wondering about this certification, you might need more than one. I mentioned earlier about the CBAP from the IIBA, and there are different recommendations here in the slide for which certification to get if you're like just a pure BA. But if you're more of a hybrid BA or a current PMP, we recommend the PBA as a way to branch out and demonstrate these things that we just talked about in terms of knowledge and competence in the business analysis field. Likewise, if you're a consultant or trainer, a PBA is pretty essential. A lot of people who have adopted this already are in this camp, but there are many other roles too, I think, that this is suitable for. Now, here's a comparison between the two certifications we've talked about, and I also included the PMP just for some interest and reference, because PMI created the PBA along many lines of the PMP, both in terms of numbers of hours, education, the exam, and fees. And I'll talk in depth about a couple of more important things in just a second. But even though there aren't quite 500 PBAs yet, there is a wide around the world interest. And I'm going to go back to the interest in today's webinar from around the world, because people in over 50 different countries around the world have been credentialed as PBAs. And that is just since August of 2014. And there is other interest too, because the PMI business analysis community is already over 100,000 strong, and the BA for Practitioners Practice Guide has been now downloaded over 50,000 times. So there's tremendous interest out there. And PMI is generating more work, and including a body of knowledge coming up starting next year. The couple of requirements I want to focus on are the project experience, number one. You need 4,500 hours of doing business analysis activities. That can be spread over the last 8 years. And 2,000 of those hours have to be spent on projects, because you might be spending time maybe on needs assessment or evaluation that could be outside of a project, but you need 2,000 hours within projects, and they can't be overlapping, and I'll talk about that in just a second. The 35-hour requirement for education is similar to what you would experience for the PMP, namely that have to be centered around business analysis. I don't know that there's any time requirement for this, not that I could find at any rate, but 35 hours of professional development experience. And thirdly, the examination, as I mentioned before, is a 200-question multiple choice exam that could take up to 4 hours to complete. And as I mentioned, 175 questions are scored on that. And we're guessing around a 70% score is needed to pass the exam, but that's just a guess. That's not been published anywhere I've seen. Let's talk about the overlapping hours for a second. The PBA handbook, which I'm going to show you a reference and where to go to download this, shows this example of overlapping projects that won't be countable for your experience. So like the two examples on the left, in the blue and the green, have some overlap in here. And so even though you have two projects from January to June, that might be like nine months if you looked at them in total, only count as 6 months of work. And so in order to keep from doubling up on project hours, the application interface will deduct some hours if it detects that you have overlapping projects. And they'll report to you how many actual hours are countable, and I'll show you a screenshot in just a moment about that, so that it's a way to get some feedback as you put the hours in. The handbook also has an interesting little flow chart, and I'm going to highlight some of the top features of this for your application journey as you're working through this. Number one, once you start your application, you have 90 days in which to complete it. So if you let it languish, you'll have to start over and start from scratch. So once you start it, we encourage you to get it done within a shorter amount of time than that even. Once you've submitted your completed application, PMI has 5 days to turn it around to let you know if it's been approved or not. And they might ask you for more information, or they might audit you. And if they audit your application, for instance, they want to ask about projects or your education or something, then you have 90 more days in order to submit to them any completed requested audit materials, whether it's a transcript or a certificate from a training class or other kind of requested information. And once your application is approved, the fourth point I want to emphasize, you have 1 year to take your exam. So that's pretty standard in the industry. So it gives you lots of time to prepare for the exam after you submit. And then last, after your credentials, you need to renew it every 3 years to keep your certification active, like it is for the PMP. That's pretty standard. And same with the number of hours. You need 60 PDUs in order to recertify. And I got a couple of thoughts at the end of the session today to talk to you about recertification. Now, for completing the application, there's some generic information that is pretty straightforward. I don't need to spend much time on that. You have to enter project by project, starting with the most recent one. We encourage you. And put the range of start date, end date, and when you worked on the project. And secondly, put in more details about the organization that you completed the project for. So you're going to have some contact info here to dig up. The most challenging part of it probably is completing the number of hours you worked by domain. And these are like knowledge areas, and I'll explain that also in just a little bit when we're talking about the exam. But there are 5 different domains, and you put in how many hours you worked in each of these segments in terms of what your business analysis experience was. And how you estimate this is really an individual thing. If you have project records or timesheets or status reports or calendars to come up with the hours that you estimate, you plug it in. It's an honor system, because how is PMI really going to know? That's partly what the audit process is for, to verify this, so that we're not just making these numbers up. And as you put these in project by project, the interface will total them up. And before you finish, then you can enter some information about the experience that you had on the project, so that it's not many characters to deal with, but just a brief summary. And then the total number of hours here you'll get after you enter each project, so that you can check to see how many hours you are on your road towards the number needed. In the bottom right-hand corner, it shows that even though we submitted 6,000 hours, it accepted only 5,877 because of the overlapping requirement that I talked about before. Still far more than the 4,500 needed, and we encourage you to enter in more hours than needed, just to make sure that the system doesn't deduct hours from what you've entered and thereby reject you. Now, if you don't have 4,500 hours, you can still keep adding more projects to this until you hit that magic number. Once you've completed all the aspects of the application, you'll get this checklist, and it'll show you what's not completed, so you'll be able to go back and complete what you need. Once everything is done, then you submit the application, and based on that flow chart I showed you earlier, then you can go on to pay for the exam and schedule it and so forth. Now, that's a lot of planning to do. So what we've done is developed an application worksheet that is just an Excel spreadsheet to help you organize all that information for the projects you've worked on. Here's a page from the instruction sheet. There is also a tab to put in project by project the information asked for on the application, including the start date, the end date, and then the number of hours by domain, which is very handy for seeing the number in total, and it'll give you feedback before you even go to the PMI application to go plug in information. This is a handy thing to get ready for it. It's also useful for your audit. If you need that, you can submit that to PMI to show them or how you came up with the total. We have this available on our website. On the bottom of the screen shows watermarklearning.com/PBA. It's a free download. Just go there. A quick little registration will get you the worksheet, and it's helped a lot of people already to organize their hours in order to submit them for the exam. Or should I say the application. All right, so check it out. Now, I'm curious, given we've talked about the application, we have another poll that Stephen's going to release to you about where you're at in your pursuit of the PBA. And already people are weighing in quite heavily in terms of just checking it out here. We have a couple of people who are studying for the exam. Yay. I'm glad to see that you're farther along in the process. But I've given this session a couple of times, and it's pretty similar to other things I've seen where roughly 90% of the people are just checking it out as well. Well, good. That's kind of what I expected, and I'm glad to see your interest, and I hope that you'll start your application after this session. Okay. Well, thanks. Thanks, Stephen. Good feedback. Now, switching gears to talk about the exam, a couple of things to think about. Currently, there is no body of knowledge that the exam is based on. Let me repeat that. There is no body of knowledge like the PMBOK, and there are things I'll talk to you about that the exam is based on. There are some other references available, including, well, the PMBOK is partly the resource you're going to need to refer to, and as well as the BA practice guide. The PMI website also lists a number of different references that are available, books on the subject that were used to write exam questions. And we'll talk more about some of those resources as well. One thing that we do know, and I'm going to talk about it right now, is something called the exam content outline. That's extremely important for knowing what you need to do to pass the exam. And as we talked about, it's also necessary for you to even apply for the exam because you have to plug in hours according to these different domains. The exam content outline starts with these 5 domains and gives a percentage of exam questions based on each of the domains. So you have needs assessment, planning, analysis, which also includes elicitation, traceability and monitoring, and evaluation. I'm going to map these to the PMBOK in just a second in a high level, but to give you an idea better of what the information or the tasks are within each of these. And so the exam content will show you this. And for each domain, you'll also see a list of high-level tasks for each of the domain. Like needs assessment, for example, the first one. There are 5 different tasks, and inside the document, there are a description of the tasks. Sometimes they're kind of high level, sometimes they're more detailed. And sometimes there are a number of techniques, sometimes they're just descriptions about identifying stakeholders, for instance. One thing that has driven people kind of, not crazy, but a little bit consternated is that there are no explicit inputs or outputs to study like there are on the PMP exam. And so that the PM body of knowledge has very straightforward inputs, tasks, techniques, and outputs, and there aren't any for this. So it makes life tougher. There's also somewhat of an inconsistent association of the techniques to the tasks or to the domains. They kind of cross over a little bit. But you know, people are passing the exam, so they're figuring this out and working their way through it. And I think the people that are most successful are the ones that pay attention to this exam content outline. Now, besides the high-level tasks, then there's a list of knowledge and skills, and you might even throw in the word techniques here, because for each of the domains there is like a list of different things. In some cases it's pretty high level, like change control tools and techniques, number 4 here. But then they also get into detail like business rule analysis tools and techniques, and then they give examples of decision tables, trees, and rule catalogs. So sometimes they get a little bit more detailed, but without any other words behind it, makes you rely on things like the BA Practice Guide and some of the reference books that are cited on the PMI website. Now, one thing to help us talk about today is describing what needs assessment and all the other domains are about, is to map it to the PMP exam content. So for needs assessment, which gets into identifying and analyzing stakeholders, and also looking at this value proposition topic, if you will. I think of it more like a business case for coming up with the root cause of a need, and then coming up with what to do about it, essentially, which is similar to the PMP exam content of the initiating process group, which covers stakeholder analysis and benefit analysis with stakeholders. So there's some correspondence there. So you can study relevant aspects of the PMBOK, I believe, to help you as well. Now for planning, this is about BA planning and a high number of questions, higher than for needs assessment, about reviewing the incoming business case and goals and objectives, and then developing requirements, management plans, and other kinds of plans for identifying what to do, not just for communication, but also identifying other activities to perform, similar to the planning process group in the PMBOK. The analysis, which covers a whopping 35% of all exam questions, so that's obviously an important area to study, both elicitation of requirements and then analyzing and modeling and documenting them. that's covered in planning techniques in the PMBOK. So it covers requirement gathering techniques and workflow diagramming, just to name two of them. Now, traceability and monitoring only has 15% of the exam questions, but it's really about things like managing changes to requirements. So that maps to, managing changes and controlling them. So in the monitoring and controlling process group, and then also tracking requirements for traceability, if you will, and so monitoring and controlling techniques, traceability and performance measurement, for instance. And finally, only 10% of the exam questions are related to the evaluation domain. So one little thing is obtaining sign-off, but it's much more than that, of course. And the closest mapping to that in the PMBOK is in the closing process group, so getting final acceptance. So there are things you can study in the PMBOK to help you with this. And these domains, if you go back and forth here, between the five of them, are also covered in the BA Practice Guide. But one thing I'm going to caution you about the BA Practice Guide is that it's designed as a practical reference on the job, and we wrote that with the idea of helping people perform business analysis and not to help them prepare for an exam. That was our specific charter from PMI, was to write a practical guide. And so some people have confused the exam preparation with that practice guide, and it doesn't, I don't think, cover what you need. So you need other resources besides the BA Practice Guide. Now, speaking of resources, what we've been talking about, the exam content outline, is in your slide deck that you're going to receive a copy of right here. I'll link to that. The PBA handbook has a wealth of information. It's pretty long. It's worth downloading. The overview is just a really high-level starting point. The PMI reference list, if you're getting into the details of studying for the exam, is worth checking out. I also was reminded of the certification registry that shows credential holders. So if you're interested in checking something out to see if they really are a credential holder. And then lastly, our webpage has a number of resources for PBA, including a summary of these links if you want to just go to our website, the PBA one, where our worksheet is also available. So I've been mentioning this practice guide for practitioners. You might own it. I think it's still available as a free download, which is longer in time availability than I originally thought. The handbooks that we talked about here, I also think that the PMBOK is still a valuable resource because things like the traceability and quality and so forth are common exam questions. The resources our company provides are also available, and working with PMI, we've decided to give away 2 prizes of our online study exam for people who are interested. So submit your interest, and I believe Stephen's going to make that available for you. So it's available for people who are interested in entering that prize drawing. Now, as we are starting to wrap up a little bit, before we get to our questions and answers, it's interesting to people who follow this like we do, wondering where is the industry going. Just with PMI entering the space of business analysis credentialing, it adds to the stature, I think, of business analysis around the world, but it also adds another competing credential. And for you and your organizations to kind of know which credential to follow and which one should I get is understandably a significant question. Because in different countries, like some people are here from the United Kingdom, the British Computer Society credential for business analysis is quite popular. And in Europe and India, the IREB certification, the CPRE, is of interest. And of course, we mentioned the PBA and the CBAP, and then IABA also has something called the CCBA. So I think what we're going to see is what my wife, my partner, Elizabeth, talks about, that there's kind of a schizophrenic approach to certifications. And it's only going to continue, where people who value it will want even more and more certifications, and those who don't really find that much interest in it will continue to ignore this. And that's, I think, trend is only going to be continuing. And so all I can say is stay tuned, and that if you're in the consulting or training fields, you pretty much have to keep adding to your credentials, I think, because the industry seems to be favoring that going forward. And we feel that with PMI's global reach and communication channels and so forth, and interest and support for this, that the PBA is only going to be increasing too going forward. Now, if you get your credential, as I mentioned before, you need to recertify, and so I'd be remiss if I didn't talk to you a little bit about this. One plus in PMI's favor is if you're already a PMP, it makes it incredibly easier to recertify your PBA as well, because you've got one spot to enter it. This is kind of an older screenshot because things just changed on December 1st. And as you put in your PDUs, you can track them here in one spot, which makes it very easy. So from a practical standpoint, it makes it easy for tracking, and then entering new events and activities, you can apply them to both credentials. And if you have more, I know there's some people with ACP and other credentials as well, maybe PGMF. All of your existing credentials will show here, and you can indicate how many PDUs apply to those other credentials as well. And I had a question for somebody who's got the ACP, wondering why doesn't this count towards that? I'd say probably half of what we're talking about today would count if you're an ACP, so I would claim a half a PDU for that today. So, again, a pure practical standpoint, it makes life a lot easier. So, I've seen a number of questions float in, and I want to switch gears and talk to you about that now. We also have, again, some resources on our website that I would point you to. So I'm going to start going through the questions. I've got them here in my list from my colleague Stephen, who's generated this. And first question comes in, and how easy is the PMI-PBA exam as compared to PMP? I'd say it's difficult. It's not as difficult as a PMP, primarily because you don't have formulas to memorize. I remember doing a lot of memorization of earned value and communication channels and many things that I would have to refer to a book now to be able to recreate. So I think from that standpoint alone, it is a little bit easier. However, I know the questions are difficult, they're challenging, and many situational questions, and so I think with all the number of sources you have to study, there's still a breadth of knowledge that makes it a challenge. So I had another question on that. Please compare the exam toughness, PMP versus PBA. Okay, so for a trainer, do you have any extra takeaways? Well, I assume you mean if you're training people on this, one of your big challenges, and it's the flip side of being a learner, is which resources do you cover to help people prepare? The biggest takeaway is make sure that you cover the exam content outline. That's the biggest takeaway. And so again, if you're studying, that's your starting point. So make sure that then you almost have to map the ECO to the different resources available to you to make sure that you're covering and understand the different aspects, because you're going to be tested on them. So somebody asked, is there a standard or guideline? I kind of lost the question here. For PBA similar to PMBOK? Well, if you're asking about standards, the answer is no. There is no PMBOK today for the PBA. There might be in the future, but there isn't right now. Somebody asked, can I use project management experience for PBA certification? Not the exact work as project manager, but sometimes in your role as a project manager, I'm betting you've done some of the needs assessment work. Have you ever done root cause analysis, for instance, on projects to understand the business need? That counts as BA experience. Have you developed a business case for needs assessment, for instance? Even though you might have done that in your role as a project manager, your work developing a business case can count hours towards that. Now, planning the same way. When you plan a project, some of the planning applies to requirements management and communications and documenting and listening. So some of those planning hours will definitely count as well. So much of your work is interacting with stakeholders and eliciting requirements. They will count. Look at your past experience, and then how much of that was actually really doing business analysis work. And I think you'd be surprised how many hours you've really spent doing BA work. And so I hope that hopefully that answers that. Once the body of knowledge comes out up in 2017, will PBAs of the pre-2017 era need to recertify themselves? My best answer is no to that one. The questioner is referring to the planned requirements management body of knowledge that is currently scheduled to come out in 2 years. I alluded to that briefly when I said it's going to start next year. We're going to start developing it next year, and it's going to come out in 2017. And no, you will not have to recertify. A person says, I have a PMP. Do the PDUs earn work for both the PBA and the PMP? The quick answer to that question is it depends. They can. Many of mine, in fact, most of mine have counted in both camps. I call it double dipping. So if I attended a workshop about just at a professional development day a couple of months ago, and I attended a session on a project communication plan. Well, as a project manager, we need to do that, but it's also business analysis work. So I counted that as a PDU for both my PMP and my PBA. So I think many hours will count in both. It depends on the subject matter. If it's something strictly about, say, developing a project plan, it may not count 100% for the PBA, but most things I think that we might attend, you'd be surprised, will count for both. Somebody says, will this continuing certification requirements for PMP and PBA be different or the same for all three categories, technical, leadership, and strategic? I believe they're going to be the same, that you need to have the similar kinds of requirements in all three categories for PBA. Somebody asks, who are some reps that can provide education courses to meet the course requirements? Well, we're one. I know Watermark Learning, all of our classes will count, all of our BA courses will count to meet the course requirements, including our PBA boot camp that we have that has all 35 hours all in one. So are there any reps offering PBA in Abu Dhabi? I do not know of any, but I do know that our virtual training can be attended from anywhere around the world. And I don't know of any REPs that are currently offering them in the Mideast. Is the PBA applicable in the construction industry? Absolutely. It's applicable anywhere there is business analysis to be done. So that I think business analysis is more than just on IT projects. As I mentioned, our vice president of operations at our company on many operational projects will use business analysis skills. So it really crosses industries. And another question, is the PMI-PBA a global credential? Oh yes, very much so. And I do think that organizations like PMI, and to some extent the IABA, because of their global reaches, are making business analysis more of an international standard. And as I mentioned before, the BCS and the IREB are more specialized in terms of their geographic. Another question, what is the requirement for current PMPs who want PMI-PBA certifications? The one thing that's different than what I already mentioned, I covered all of those requirements and you have them available in the slide deck. The one thing that you don't need to worry about is the 2,000-hour project requirement. If you are already a PMP, that 2,000-hour thing is just automatic. It's a given. Otherwise, everything that's in the requirements that I've already covered apply. Now, if somebody says the PBA certification relevant to the telecom industry, the services industry, and absolutely, just like the question about the construction industry, it is something that transcends industry. The additional cost to achieve the certification is on that earlier slide, and you have that available in your slide deck to remind you, and I have to go into my notes because sometimes those things are a little bit detailed. Now, it costs $405 if you're a member of PMI and $555 to get certified if you're not a member. And that's the cost. Can a PMP try for a PBA without business analyst experience? Now, you have to have business analysis experience. If you're a PMP and you have done the work in those 5 domains, as I kind of alluded to, I do urge you to look at the exam content outline and look at the different tasks to see, have you done those things? And get our spreadsheet, start plugging in hours according to that to see how many hours qualify. So yes, a PMP certainly can qualify, but you need to have business analysis experience, even if it's not part of your job title. Somebody's asking, if I am coordinating business requirements and are completely improperly shared with the vendor, it means these hours will be counted in. Well, if I understand the question correctly, if you're working with a vendor, I don't think it matters. That again, if it's, I may have misunderstood your question, but if you are doing business analysis work, it doesn't matter if it's IT or non-IT, custom development, package software, it all counts. Somebody else asks, how much does the BA body of knowledge cover for PBA certification? What does the BABOK miss? The BABOK, as we like to call it, covers, I think, a slightly broader array of areas, but not by a lot. Both the PBA and the BA body of knowledge, and specifically the CBAP exam, are interested in anywhere from business need all the way through final solution evaluation. I think the BABOK perhaps might miss on some areas of quality, and perhaps some of the areas of managing and changing or change management of requirements, and perhaps some of the planning areas. Although it's pretty extensive on planning. So those are a couple quick thoughts on the top of my head. I think the BABOK doesn't miss a lot, but its emphasis is definitely on just a professional business analyst as opposed to one who needs to know something about project management as well. Somebody asked, are there some resources in Spanish? I wish I knew the answer to that. I would urge you to go to the back up here, our list of resources, the links here. Check out the links that are available, and you'll find the answer to that question. So someone says, if you attend a 2 PDU event, can you put 2 PDUs to PMP and 2 PDUs to PBA? The answer is yes. You don't have to do one-on-one. If you're at a 2 PDU event and it covers both project management and business analysis, you can count 2 PDUs each. And the key is how much of that. If it's really, really focused on a finer point of business analysis, it may be just PBA and not PMP. But like I said earlier, I attended some sessions that were clearly both, and I got credit for them in both. And I just recertified in both my PMP and PBA. Somebody says, I'm a PMI member and PMP for 1 year. Congratulations. Now, the PBA would be highly recommended, but is there any recommendation to wait, getting more experience with PMI and being PMP before getting the PBA? Well, it really depends on your situation. I don't think there's any need to wait. If your experience over the last 8 years includes 4,500 hours of BA experience, I think it's almost better to go for the PBA now. And the reason I say that is that it takes a bit to get yourself into shape mentally to pass the PMP. Would you agree? I know it took me like 2 years of part-time studying. I really didn't study in enough chunks, so it spread out for me over 2 years. Now, had I then started studying for another exam, I think my brain would have been in that mode of absorbing information and practicing questions and being able to pass a 4-hour exam. So I think there are almost as many advantages to do it right away, assuming you qualify. I think that's the key. And if your personal life can handle the studying time to do it, I would estimate about 100 hours of study time in order to pass the PBA. That's a number that we got from our research on the CBAP exam, that the average amount was around 100 hours to prepare for it. Somebody asks, what time frame can you look back to calculating your experience for the application? Up to 8 years. You can go back up to 8 years to get those 4,500 or more hours. Another person says, I thought BA is solution track and PM is delivery track and both are different routes. Is that correct? Incorrect? Why? I'm going to have to look into that question as far as I think of them as more similar in terms of tracks and that. And I am not as well versed as some of my colleagues at the new CCR, so I'm going to have to look into that. Someone else says, I am a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt professional. Can I use this experience for the PBA? That depends. I know for IIBA, they're not too keen on using Six Sigma, but you could try it because it is, some of those hours are business analysis hours. I don't think you'll get necessarily the 35 hours because there's much about Six Sigma that's not strictly business analysis. So I think some of those hours should count. So let's see, the next question. Just to confirm, as a PMP, we only need to prove 2,500 hours instead of the 4,500. No, that's not correct. You still need 4,500 hours, whether you're a PMP or not. Remember, there's a second requirement that of those 4,500 hours, 2,000 hours needs to be done on projects. If you're a PMP, you still need the 4,500 hours to a BA experience, but you don't have to worry about the 2,000 hours. It is assumed because you are a PMP already. Does that make sense? So both credentials, you need to worry about the 4,500 hours, whether or not, in other words, whether or not you have the PMP. Question, Watermark has some virtual classes in April. Is there any self-paced training courses? What we have is what we call anytime learning. What they are is a way to take our training class and do it on your own time and spread it out as long as you need to over about a 90-day period. We give you access to it. So in other words, we call it the next best thing to being in class because it's listening in on an instructor and student questions and answers just as if you're in the class. So it's almost like you're eavesdropping, but you get all the same other information that you get. It's not true e-learning in that sense, but it's been very helpful to people, and that's the option we have. Okay, another question. Any BA courses other than boot camp? Yes, a person could take any kind of business analysis course. We have several, and other vendors, of course, as well too. So you don't have to take a boot camp at all. You could take any skill-based class that'll help you on the job, and then do your studying, and I think plenty of people do that as well. Next question. So if you do analysis work purely as assessments, none of which turn into programs or projects, then you won't have the 2,000 hours with projects. Is that right? That is correct. Let me repeat that. If all of your business analysis work is purely on doing assessments or business cases, root cause analysis and the like, that won't count because it's not on projects. Unless you're a PMP. If you're a PMP, then you will qualify. Somebody says, I might have missed it. For 35 hours of training required, would a PM training count? The answer is no. PM training, no. You have to have business analysis related training to count for the PBA. For the 35 hours of training, does it need to be through a vendor or can it be self-directed studying? I am under the impression it needs to be with a vendor, but that's also something I'll have to check with PMI on because I how you prove that you actually spent the time working on and doing the training is difficult to ascertain. So I know for IBA, and I know it doesn't apply necessarily to PMI, they require some instructor interaction. I do not know the answer for PMI, and you could ask them as well. I will check on that. So let's see. I'm really pretty much out of questions, it looks like, unless you have more for me today. Somebody's asking, do you offer the training in Orange County, California? The answer is no, because we offer our virtual option, so you could attend it from Orange County. And somebody's asking, can I use training on business intelligence for the training also? It depends on the focus. We have a course on business intelligence requirements analysis, and all of those hours would count. If you're learning about data warehousing and extract, transform, and load, and those may not count, I don't think. You'll have slides available to you after the session. And I still see some more questions floating in too, so I think Stephen is working through those. There are some questions that are not necessarily both. There's just a new one saying, if you're a CBAP and a PMP, can appropriate PDUs be counted toward both recertifications? And the answer there is yes. So some of you, if you're a PMP and a CBAP like I am, some of my hours I count towards my PMP and PBA also count for the CBAP. Would that be called triple dipping? I don't know. But I've got a spreadsheet where I keep track of, is it applicable to IABA or PMI or both? And so I keep track of that way. I just keep a simple list of my PDU activity. There is a giving back element of the CCR. Somebody's asking, can you please elaborate on the giving back PDU report? The giving back is things like doing a session like this, or speaking at a professional development day, or writing an article, and those giving back kind of categories count PDUs towards your recertification of all your PMI certifications. And it's yet another way to earn those. One of the last questions coming in is, so for the PBA, we have to log all 4,500 hours? Yes. Or just the 2,000 hours in projects? No. You have to log all 4,500. And the total 4,500 hours adds to holding the position. I'm not sure, that doesn't make sense to me, sorry. So just to review, you have to enter all 4,500 hours, and you have to indicate in your description that it was done on projects. So that way PMI can count if you hit that 2,000 hour requirement. So thank you for those of you that are saying it was an informative session. We really tried hard to make it applicable, and thank you all for attending. And you got our contact information here. If you have any more follow-up questions about resources or training or anything like that, of course, we'd be delighted to hear from you. So check us out online and or through LinkedIn or whatever. So I really appreciate your kind attention, and keep the questions going and the interaction going. And there's also on projectmanagement.com a place to enter comments and questions as well. So I want to thank you all, and thank you, Stephen, for doing a great job helping moderate today.
Well, thank you very much, Rich, for that great presentation, and thank you all for your participation and your lively commentary. Just a couple quick reminders before we close out. One PDU will automatically be reported for PMI credential holders who view either the live or recorded version of this webinar. It can take a couple of weeks for the PDUs to appear on your member profile. If it does not appear, please contact community support at pmi.org. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be available on projectmanagement.com within 24 hours. A link to view but not download the slides will also be available on the on-demand webinar page. Thank you all again for attending, and we hope to see you again soon.